Your car battery, phone chips, power tools, the electric grid, and defense hardware all rely on minerals most people never think about. If those supplies get squeezed, factories don't just slow down, entire product lines can stop. And now the US says it is building a national mineral stockpile to prevent that. The core question: who wins and who pays? On February 2, 2026, the White House unveiled Project Vault, a plan to build a national stockpile of critical minerals with an announced budget of roughly $12 billion. The program is structured as a public-private partnership, combining a $10 billion loan from the United States Export-Import Bank, known as EXIM, with nearly $2 billion in private sector capital. Supporters describe this as a direct response to recent supply chain shocks that halted factories and threatened jobs, and they say it aims to shield American manufacturing and defense systems from future shortages and wild price swings. Project Vault's stated purpose is to purchase and store the raw materials that power everything from electric vehicles to semiconductors to missile guidance systems. The reserve will cover all 60 minerals on the United States Geological Survey's 2025 critical minerals list, with particular attention to rare earth elements, cobalt, copper, and materials like germanium and gallium, many of which are currently processed overseas, especially in China. Backers say it is meant to function like an insurance policy for industry, ensuring that if global supplies tighten, American companies have guaranteed access to the materials they need to keep assembly lines running. Exim Bank, the federal agency tasked with financing United States exports, stands at the center of the initiative. This is the largest loan in its 92-year history, signaling the scale and urgency of the effort. Private commodity firms and manufacturers are expected to manage the actual buying and storage, but it is the government's financial backing that makes the scale possible. Supporters argue this approach spreads risk and cost between taxpayers and industry, while critics warn it could expose the public to long-term liabilities if the program underperforms. For now, the headline is clear: $12 billion committed to building a mineral reserve that supporters hope will buffer the United States economy against the next big supply shock. Imagine the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, but instead of barrels of oil, the government is filling warehouses with the metals and minerals that power daily life. Project Vault draws on a simple idea most Americans know. When oil got scarce, the United States built a reserve to keep the country moving. Now the same logic is being applied to materials like lithium, cobalt, copper, and rare earth elements, substances that are not just for high-tech gadgets, but are essential for car batteries, wind turbines, power grids, and missile guidance systems. The stakes became clear in 2025 when Ford had to halt production of the Explorer. It was not a labor dispute or a software bug. It was a shortage of rare earths. No amount of money could make the minerals appear. Assembly lines stood still, workers were sent home, and the ripple effects hit suppliers and dealerships across the country. Ford's experience is not unique. Every major automaker, electronics giant, and defense contractor now faces the same exposure. If even one mineral goes missing, an entire product line can grind to a halt. For a plant manager in Michigan or Kentucky, it is not just about price, it is about certainty. If there is a guarantee that lithium or cobalt will be available, production can keep rolling, jobs stay secure, and contracts get fulfilled. Supporters of Project Vault describe it as an insurance policy for American industry, a way to buy peace of mind in a world where supply shocks are no longer rare events. But that insurance comes with a price, and the question of who pays for that certainty is far from settled. Project Vault runs on a three-step cycle: buy early, store safely, and release when it counts. The first step starts with a demand signal. Manufacturers, think automakers, defense contractors, and electronics giants, commit to the minerals they will need months or years ahead, locking in both price and volume. This is not just a bulk buy, it is a guarantee to miners and processors that someone will be there to take delivery, even if the market turns. For a commodity trader, that is the difference between a risky bet and a sure thing. When a mine knows there is a committed buyer, it can finance new capacity without worrying that a price crash will leave it stranded. Once purchased, minerals move into storage. Unlike oil, which can sit for years in underground caverns, many of these materials need active care, rotation to prevent degradation, climate controls, and tight security. The costs do not pause just because nothing dramatic is happening. Companies pay ongoing fees, not just for the privilege of access, but to cover insurance, storage, and the cost of rotating inventory. Supporters describe these fees as a kind of insurance premium. You pay steadily to make sure you are not caught short when the market gets rough. The final step is release. If a disruption hits, say a sudden export ban or a price spike, Vault can supply minerals directly to those who have reserved them. Instead of factories scrambling and prices spiraling, the reserve acts as a shock absorber. This is not just about having metals on a shelf. It is about changing how risk is priced in the market, shifting the incentive from panic buying to steady, predictable supply. For traders and manufacturers, that stability can be worth more than chasing the lowest price. Every insurance policy has a price. Project Vault is no different. Manufacturers and commodity traders pay steady fees to secure their slice of the reserve, fees that cover storage, maintenance, and the interest on the $10 billion government-backed loan from the Export-Import Bank. These payments are meant to keep the system running and, in theory, repay the loan over time. The fee structure rewards those with the scale and capital to participate, including major miners, global trading houses, and the largest manufacturers. For these players, Vault offers predictable demand and a new stream of revenue from storage and handling. But the real backstop is not private money, it is the federal loan. If fee income falls short, taxpayers are on the hook for the gap. Supporters argue this risk is small compared to the cost of letting factories shut down, but critics warn that public exposure could grow if manufacturers draw less than expected or if minerals lose value in storage. An economist might put it this way: the upside flows to miners, traders, and manufacturers, while the downside quietly lands with the public. The debate over who profits and who carries risk sits at the heart of Vault's design. For companies that buy into Project Vault, the promise is stability, but the math behind that promise is more complicated than it looks. The storage and insurance fees that manufacturers pay are not just a cost of doing business, they ripple through the supply chain, quietly making their way into the price of finished goods. A procurement analyst at a battery maker might put it this way: every ton of lithium or cobalt stored in Vault carries a fee. And while it may only add a few dollars to the cost of a car or an appliance, those dollars add up across millions of products. The lag between when a fee is paid and when it shows up in consumer prices can stretch for months, sometimes longer, as contracts and inventories cycle through. But the real risk is not just financial. Critics warn that if companies start relying on Vault as their safety net, they may cut back on their own inventory, shifting the burden of resilience from private ledgers to the public reserve. This creates what economists call moral hazard, the incentive for companies to take more risks because they know the government will step in if things go wrong. If too many firms lean on Vault, the system could become more fragile, not less. The question of when and how minerals are released from storage is also left open. Without clear rules-based triggers and independent oversight, decisions could drift from stabilizing markets to serving short-term interests. For a program built on trust, transparency and governance is not just a box to check, it is the foundation that keeps the whole system credible. A map of the world's mineral supply chain tells a blunt story. While Project Vault fills warehouses with raw materials, the real choke point sits thousands of miles away, in the processing plants that turn ore into usable inputs. Today, most of those plants are in China and Southeast Asia. Even if the U.S. stockpiles lithium or rare earths, American factories still depend on foreign refineries to convert them into battery-grade compounds or high-purity metals. A processor executive puts it plainly: you can't build a car with a pile of rocks. You need the right chemical in the right form at the right time. Critics warn that by focusing on stockpiling, Vault may dodge the harder and slower work of building up domestic processing. If a disruption hits and foreign processors retaliate by tightening exports or raising prices, the minerals in Vault risk becoming stranded inventory. The lag between storing raw materials and having finished inputs ready for manufacturing could leave factories just as exposed as before. Visual data shows that over 75% of rare earths and battery metals still flow through Chinese processors before reaching U.S. assembly lines. For now, the gap between mine and factory remains wide. The question is not just whether America can stockpile enough minerals, but whether it can actually turn them into the products that keep the economy running. Today, America's minerals reserve, worth $12 billion, shifts the balance between national security and pocketbook cost. As supply chains get stronger, taxpayers and consumers carry new risks, often quietly, through higher prices or public debt. The real test is whether this stockpile protects the future or just postpones tough choices. Share your thoughts below.